Agut Mayed. Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to be having a shir today, the halachas of Achana, from one day of Yom Tov to the next day of Yom Tov, Yom Tov L'chel, from Yom Tov to Yom Tov, from the first days of Yom Tov to the second days of Yom Tov, Mitzvah Hashem. The shiurim are going to be pasha based on structure, based on Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We're holding Tavkuf Gimel, Sim Tavkuf Gimel, the halachas of Shlei L'hochim, Yom Tov L'chavere, Ubei Yud Gimel Seifim, Mitzvah Hashem. That's going to be the text, the side of what we're going to be focused on. And the emes is, before we start, I want to be back to a little mice I heard not too long ago. I heard it quite a few times, and I heard it with different names every single time. So it's very fascinating. Sometimes I heard it B'Shem Dain Padva, and later on I saw it printed. He has a famous sefer. It's not from him, but his Talmud was Harav Avram Yen Schwartz, the Bezdin in Vienna. And he was a ben bayis by Dain Padva in London. He was known as the London Dain, a very, very chashuv Pesach. So this Harav Avram Yen Schwartz, he was a ben bayis by him. He took Shemesh by him. He was his Pesach Muvok. And he put together a sefer, his notes, Haliches Chanoich it's called. All of the Haliches Van Hagis Piskei Ra that he saw by Dain Padva. And his children later printed it as a full sefer, Haliches Chanoich. So I saw the following story. I saw it in that sefer, and then later on I heard it by B'Shem Achedim, B'Shem other Gdei Yisrael. I heard it B'Shem Rebbein Arik. I heard it B'Shem others as well. I don't remember offhand who else, but it's a story that goes around that they say that there's two sets of halachas that they never were able to be toifus with clarity, to really, really understand. Hilchas Cholamayid and the halachas of Chanukah. Hilchas Chanukah. So I remember when I was taking Shemush in the Yisachas Beis Hira, I hung around there a little bit, and the Dain over there, he was above a Chassid, not just because it's called Yisachas Beis Hira. It doesn't mean that everybody over there is limited to that sect, but they take Dayanim from all over. So he himself was above a Rechaz, so he looks at me, he says, you know why? You know why this and this Gadol said that they were not able to fully understand these two sets of halachas? So he said, very simple, because there's no Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch on these halachas. So now it's Cholamayid, and we're not going to be learning the halachas now of Cholamayid, but I figured if the structure of the Shir Mitzvah Hashem is going to be based off the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, I think it's kedai at least to mention that Maisa in connection to the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch with Cholamayid, this man that we're holding it now, as well as, but it's interesting when it's quoted, when the same story is quoted, B'Shem Dain Padva, he mentions Hilchas Ribis as well, which is a Chiddush, because we know that we do have Hilchas Ribis printed from the Alter Rebbe, so it could be that at that time it was not available, it was something which was not benimtza. So with that short Akdama, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to begin the halachas of Achana from Yom Tov L'Chavere or from Yom Tov L'Chel, Mitzvah Hashem. The goal is to just bring a little bit of clarity, a little bit of awareness, so to speak, to the halachas, so the Elam should know, spice it up a little bit, so to speak, Mitzvah Hashem. So let's begin. We know, and we're going to see it in Alter Rebbe as well, it's the Gemara discusses it already, that there's an Isser. You're not allowed to be meichin from Shabbos to Chel. You're not allowed to do something from Shabbos to a weekday, right? And really, this is a shtikl yisoid that you're not allowed to be meichin in the Yom Tov L'Chavere, but it's a little bit different. Everybody's familiar with the Isra of you're not allowed to prepare from Shabbos to Chel. Now, the shaila is, what is the problem of being meichin me Yom Tov L'Yom Tov? L'cheira, the both of them are, it's a Yom Tov, it's Kedusha, you're meichin from Kodesh to Kodesh. I understand from Shabbos to Chel, and Taka makes sense. On Shabbos, you should not be nisasik b'dvarim shel Chel, but when it comes to from Yom Tov to Yom Tov, the shaila is, what exactly is the Yesod? What's the foundation of this Isser? Is it an Isser Mideiraisa? Is it an Isser Midrabanan? What exactly is the Yesod of this Isser? So we'll speak through a little bit outside, and we'll see that it actually categorizes into two different Hagdadas. Really, Azoi. Mina Torah, there's only one Yom Tov, right? The fact that we have Shtei Yom Tovim, one Yom Tov, which is Yom Tov Shagali, is the second day of Yom Tov, which is only in Chutz La'aretz, this is really not Minat Torah, right? Minat Torah, there's only one Yom Tov. Pesach, really Minat Torah is only one day. Sukkot is only one day. I'm talking about the first days, not the second days. The first day of Yom Tov is only one day of Yom Tov, right? Chag HaShavuos is it's only one day, not 2 days. So it comes out like this. 1 second. If Minat Torah, only one of them is Taka Yom Tov, Midei Raisa, and the other one, Midei Raisa, is a Yom Chel. It's completely a regular day, a completely regular weekday. So what's going to happen? You are now doing a malacha on Yom Tov, let's say Chel. So technically, it's B'deima a little bit too the Isra that we mentioned earlier for being Nisasik, the Tzarkei Chel B'Yem HaShabbos. However, the emes is it's even worse than that, so to speak. In certain respects, the Isra of Achana Miyam Tov Liyam Tov has a few more chumras than the Isra of Achana from Shabbos to Chel. And that is as follows. We know that the Torah was matir melachas eichel nefesh on Yom Tov. Right? This is the beginning of Ilchas Yom Tov, all the Yesodis that we have over there in the first siman in Tav Tzadik Hey, in Ilchas Yom Tov, all the Yesodis over there. The malachas, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. So we know that malachas eichel nefesh was only hutra if it's a tzerich Yom Tov. So what's going to happen if you're now being mevashel on Yom Tov? Let's say Rachel, it comes out that the Torah was never matter such a pa'ul of bishul. Right? The entire purpose, the entire heter that there is in order to be mevashel on Yom Tov is let's say Yom Tov. And if right now the pa'ula of bishul that you're doing is let's say Rachel, the Torah was never matter such a thing. Umemela comes out that you're being over on an Issa Deiraisa, potentially. We'll see. It's not so simple. There are many ways around it. But technically, if somebody's doing it in all the wrong ways, there is the potential for it to be an Isser Mideiraisa. Now, with that being said, what about being Mechin from one Yom Tov, the first days of Yom Tov, to the second days of Yom Tov? So technically, right, it's not Mechin from Yom Tov to Chel. It's Vada Yom Tov. Let's say the first day of Yom Tov to the first of the second days of Yom Tov. Right? So for the first day of Pesach to Shvi Shel Pesach, let's say. So the Shaila is, technically you're doing it from Yom Tov, let's say Yom Tov. Would that be permitted or not? So we have a Shari Tzion. The Shari Tzion brings that Be'etzim, technically, Al Pi Svara, there should have been room to be matter this. Elamai, the Chisar, what's the problem? The problem is, weiter, 1 second, the Torah was only matter Melechas Eichel Nefesh. What does that mean? If the food is able to be in a skyim this entire time, it's not something that needs to be made fresh, you could have done it on Chol Hamoed. Why are you doing it on Yom Tov? So technically, mitzad the din of achana, you could technically taina that there isn't an isser of achana. However, there's a separate isser, there's a separate problem, there's a separate issue that lemaisa right now, once you're being mevashel, it's not really eichel nefesh in a way that the Torah permitted it, because lemaisa you could have been easily mevashel it by Chol Hamoed. It's something that has a kiyum to it for a few days at least, certainly. If that's the case, then it's not so simple to be matir such a bishul on Yom Tov. If anyways the food is able to be niskayim for so long, so you have to do it on Chol Hamoed, and that would not be a reason to be matir the bishul on Yom Tov itself. Now, that's all when it comes to malachas mideiraisa, such as bishul, which is probably the most common shaila, the most prevalent scenario where there is a shaila, an isra of achana. The question is, does this isra also apply to other things as well? Can you do something which has nothing to do with actual bishul or any other malacha mideiraisa, something to do pashat with you're doing a maisa which has no isra to it, no inherent isra, there's no isra atzmi to it, that it's a malacha of Yom Tov. However, the maisa itself is a maisa which are being meichin from Yom Tov to Yom Tov. For example, the famous example which is brought down in the Pasuk, the Alter Rebbe as well quotes it, you're washing the dishes on Yom Tov Rishon, let's say Yom Tov Sheni. So technically, if you're doing it in an Eifen where there is no Isurim which are being done on Yom Tov, technically, L'chayra, it should have been permitted, because if the whole Isra of Achon is dafka because there is no heter of Melachas Eichel Nefesh, so technically, over here, we don't have to come on to that. There is no Isra being done. So Meirav Rabbi said the halacha actually is that no, even in such a case, even though you're not doing a melach Medeiraisa, but there's still an ism Rabbanon of being meichin on Yom Tov, L'tzerech Chel, B'deima too, being meichin on Shabbos, L'tzerech Chel as well. So it's a very, very, very important nekuda. So it's not only a halacha which is limited to Isuri Deiraisa of actual malachas gemurais. However, it's also something which includes other actions as well. You're not allowed to prepare on Yom Tov, the Yom Tov Rishon, for Yom Tov Sheni, even by washing the dishes on the same day, so on and so forth. Again, Imretz Hashem, we will be covering in the Alter Rebbe himself the interesting hagdaras of how it could be permitted, potentially. However, I do want to share with you, before we continue, the famous shita of the Chaye Adam. Chaye Adam, in Klal Tzadik Ches and Kufnun Beis, he's matter, b'shas adchak, for shar dvarim, for let's say washing the dishes, uchadayma. So b'shas adchak, he writes it's permitted. However, you have to be careful that it has to be done b'oid hayem gadol, that it's still very early on in the day, that it should not look, it should not be muchach milsa, it should not be obvious and blatantly obvious to others the reason why you're doing it, that it's for the purpose of the next day. It has to be done in a way where it's, so to speak, camouflaged, that it's so again, technically you're doing it for tomorrow. Elamai, you're doing it in a certain way that it's not muchach milsa, that it's being done for the next day. So he writes, b'makim tzerech gadol, you could do it l'tzerech mocher, as long as it's early on in the day. Okay, very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. So let's start. Imretz Hashem. Let's start the Alter Rebbe, and we'll be makdim a few gemaras at different points. Imretz Hashem, different rishonim, but really the goal is to cover as much and explain as much pshat in the Alter Rebbe as much as we're able to do so. Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarich, b'siyanta d'shmaya. Aleph. The Alter Rebbe starts off, Kol melechas eichel nefesh lehutra b'yom tov elim kein eisa kedei lenisba b'yom tov. Yeah, so any melechas eichel nefesh was not permitted on Yom Tov elim kein. The only exclusion to that is that you're able to be nehena from this melach itself on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do, to bake, to shecht, to cook on Yom Tov what you're going to be eating on Chel. V'im ofa v'shachat v'bishal ay osa shar melachas eichel nefesh b'yom tov l'tzerich melach and afilu hu Shabbos shechali is acher Yom Tov hareza loikem min ha-Torah. As we mentioned earlier in the Akdama, very, very important, melachas eichel nefesh lehutra elim kain, that it's for that day itself. But if it's for the next day, and Alter Rebbe's Meisif, even if it's a tzerich Shabbos, which is coming the next day, it makes no difference. Why? Because you have to be able to be nehena from it. The purpose is you're doing the malacha in order that you should be able to use it on Yom Tov. If you're not able to use it on Yom Tov, then it's an issa hareza loika min ha-Torah, the Alter Rebbe writes. It's an issa m'deiraisa. Beis, Alter Rebbe continues, b'meh devarim amurim, k'shas ha-malacha b'yom tov samalacha chashecha, be'inyin she'efsher klal le'enes mimenu b'yom tov atzmei. Avlim efsher le'enes mimenu b'yom tov atzmei, afa b'she'enu yireitz le'enes mimenu b'yom tov, ve'inyin eisa ela l'tzerech el, hareza pater min ha-Torah, afa b'she'enu malacha tzrich le'klal b'yom tov, shekvar achal kol sudasei, hoyul im hoyim azdamnim le'erchim, shlei achal adayin hayem, eisa malacha zu tzrich le'hem, v'yimutu le'lasesa, im kein, harim malacha zu nikras malacha seichel nefesh, v'af she'en le'erchim ein isra min ha-Torah la'seisa umikol mokim, chachamim asrua, v'oisa kein, makin ois makas mardos. The Alter Rebbe gives us a very, very important klal over here. So when do we say that there's an isra m'deiraisa, when there's absolutely zero tzerich for Yom Tov itself? Meaning to say, it's being done samach l'chashecha, when you're doing it pashat close to the end of the day. However, if you're doing it b'eid hayem gadol, even though you're technically after your seudah and you really don't need it for yourself, aber l'maisa min ha-Torah, there still is a shtikl tzerich for it. Why? Because if technically nizdamnu le'erchim, if you would have technically received guests, you would have had guests, then you would have what to serve them. So since midei naisa, you have epis at tzerich for it for that day itself, Therefore, it's no longer considered achana from Yom Tov to the next day, and therefore, min ha-Torah, we can't say that there's malchus. However, midrabanan, there's a problem to do so if it's from Yom Tov to Shabbos, so you have to make an erev tavshilin. It's a gzeira midrabanan, fine. However, from Yom Tov to Yom Tov, it would not be an isra midei Gimel. V'afilu davar she'en b'hem melacha klal. This what we mentioned earlier, very important. Al Rebbe continues on this Nekodah. Kegei la'adiach kelim v'chayetze b'zeh also lasis alachim b'yom tov l'tzerech chel. You're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov for the purpose of chel, for the next day. V'afilu l'tzerech Shabbos la'achrav, even for the purpose of Shabbos, which comes after it. Im le'hinich eruvit havshilin v'chein l'tzerech Yom Tov sheni b'geila. As well, it's also a problem to do so for the second day of Yom Tov in chutz la'aretz. V'afilu l'tzerech Yom Tov sheni shel Rosh Hashanah shein kedusha achas v'nechshavin kiyem echad aruch l'hachmir avaloi lahakal. This is very, very important. So technically, I would have thought to say everyone learns, all the Gemaras. We all know that Rosh Hashanah it's kedusha achas kiyem arichta damya, right? So technically, I would have thought to say that maybe on Rosh Hashanah we would be able to be meichen from one day to the next day. Zog Al Rebbe, no, this is only lahachmer avalei lahakal. That's not a svara to be matter machana from one day to the next. Shari on the bekim bekvias achedesh v'onu yoidim sheyem echad hu kedesh min atayra yem sheni chel gomer min atayra. Very, very important. Al Rebbe is saying what we mentioned earlier in the Agdama, because lemaisa, first of all, we are baki in what day is what, right? And we know be'etzem which day is kodesh min hatayra, and which one min hatayra is chel gomer. It's not a yom tov min hatayra. V'nimtza meichin mi yom tov lechel. And it comes out that what are you doing? You're being meichin, you're preparing from one day of yom tov, which is kodesh lechel. L'chein yesh leizar shalei lehavi yain b'yom tov rishon l'tzerich kiddush leil yom tov sheni. As well, one has to be careful not to bring wine on the first day of Yom Tov for the purpose of making Kiddush on Leil Yom Tov Sheni. V'chein lo yichapes b'sefer Torah b'Yom Tov Rishon masher tzarich likros b'Yom Tov Sheni. You should not prepare the Sefer Torah, look to search for the Sefer Torah, the Kriya, on Yom Tov Rishon for the Kriya of Yom Tov Sheni. B'Shabbos she'achar Yom Tov afal b'shinich iruvit avshilin. This is very, very important. Even though technically, even in a case where it's Yom Tov leading into Shabbos, so Yom Tov to Yom Tov is pshita, you can't do it. Right, but from Yom Tov to Shabbos, I have a shtickle heter, which is Eruvit Avshilin. Zagd Al Rebbe to prepare the Sefer Torah from one day to the next day, which is Shabbos. It's not going to help you the fact that you prepared Eruvit Avshilin. She'ein Eruvit Avshilin mater elo tikun sarkis seudah Shabbos avelei shai achonis b'Yom Tov l'Shabbos k'mashakazav b'simin shin tzad gimel. Very, very, very important. Al Rebbe lays it out very, very clearly, and as it's discussed in Siman Shin Tzad Gimel, that an Erev Tavshilin only helps the Tzarkis Seudah to be meichin from one day to the next. However, for other purposes of Achana, it's not something which could be matter for them. Dalid. Now we're getting to the interesting din. You know what? Before we get to Dalid and Alter Rebbe, I think it's Kedai, we should be makdim the Gemara. Let's be makdim a little bit the Gemara, what the Alter Rebbe is going to be down on right now. So the Gemara says as follows: Tan Rabbanon ein eifin miyam tov l'chaveirei. The Gemara tells us that you cannot be oifa, one cannot bake from one Yom Tov to the next. Be'emes amrim mamala isha kol akteira balser afal b'she'ena tzrich ela l'chaticha achas. And in the same Gemara, it tells us that really an Isha is allowed to be mamala an entire kedera of basar, even though she only needs one of the pieces. Right? So you're able to cook up a full pot of meat, even though what you really need is only one. Mamala nachtem chavish al mayim afal b'she'ena tzarich ela l'kitain echad. And nachtem can fill up an entire kitain filled with water. Even though, a chavis, I apologize. Yeah, he has a whole barrel of water, even though he only needs one little jug, one little kitain. Why? Mishum debechatir chenases kulei. Why are we matter everything? So technically, you only need one of those pieces of meat. You only need one cup of water. You only need a little bit of it. Nevertheless, the Gemara is telling us, in order for you to get that little bit, what you need, you're able to be mevashel an entire kedera, or to be mechamim an entire chavis shalmayim. The Rashi explains, as we just said, why? Because it's only one Maisa Habishal. Right? It's only Ribu B'Shiurim. This Gemara is quoted very, very much in the Sugya of Ribu B'Shiurim, which we're now going to be discussing today. But La Maisa, it's one Maisa Bishal. It's one Maisa Afiyah. With that one Maisa, you're cooking up a lot, but you're not adding anything. There's no extra tircha to get to the other things. Avalafes, in order to bake, baking, you're only allowed to do whatever you need. So according to the first shita bishul, you can do whatever you need in the same pot. Afiyah, you can only bake whatever is necessary. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar pass. No, you can take a bunch of chalas, whatever it is, dough shaped as chalas. You can fill up the entire tanur. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is coming to be mechadash a new din that technically I don't need every single one of those pieces of bread. However, I'm allowed to bake all of them together. Why? Because shapas nefe yafa k'shataner mole. If my bread is going to be mashbiach even better, because I have other bread which is baking there at the same time, that itself is considered l'tzerech yomtiv. Why? That in order that my bread should be better, I'm baking others. But the purpose of the baking of the other breads is l'tzerech my bread that I need for yomtiv. Amar Rava halacha k'Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. And Rava taka is machriya. The halacha goes like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that if it's only for the purpose of shvach, that it should make it better, shavach, that it's mashbiach, whatever I have, then we could be mekom, and that would suffice as well. So with that quick hakdama, there's a lot to discuss, Bemis, but let's go straight to the Alter Rebbe, and just to see the achra of the Alter Rebbe, how the Alter Rebbe says, based on a rekeach, if you're allowed to verbalize it, if you're not allowed to verbalize it, very, very, very important halachas, which we're going to be discussing. So the Alter Rebbe reads as follows in If Dalid. Sorry, I just closed my sefer. Oh, here we go. Dalid. V'shnei drachim hitiru chacham lasis melachas oichal nefesh b'yomtov l'tzerech achel. There's two ifanim. I paused in the middle, but there's two ifanim which Chazal were matter to do melachas oichal nefesh on yomtiv for the purpose of using it b'chel. Im nehenam in miktzas melachas zu b'yomtiv atzmei. Right? In a case where a person is going to be nehenah from this miktzas malacha, whatever he did, he's going to be nehenah b'miktzas, then the halacha is there's two ifanim of how it could be permitted. Ha'alef, she'oisa kol ha'malacha b'vas achas, the entire malacha is done in one shot, k'gon sh'memalach chava shel mayim, v'noista al ha'esh, you put it on the fire, v'intzarech lei b'yomtiv ala kiten echad ha'reza mutar, like we saw in the Gemara. Everybody agrees to this. Kiven de b'shas asiyas ha'malacha dahainu b'shas she'noista al ha'esh, he nasas kula ke'achas, ve'enei meisiv malacha l'tzerech achel. You're not adding any malacha itself for the purpose of chel. So technically so this is one of the drachim. Kol malkim also lemer b'feh b'shas bishul hamayim shameisa yihiyah l'chel ela mevashel stam. Okay, so this is this is a raid based on the rekeach. The Tur Taka writes. I'll just read to you the lashon of the Tur. The Yeshemrim da filu amra befeirish she writes to Eisla tzerich machar mutter. So the Tur grad is meiko v'yesh eisrin. Then the Tur continues v'nirish mutter kiven the tam hahetem mipnei shatei sefes geirim tam betavshil im kein afilu pirsha befeirish nami mutter. The Tur grad is very, very meiko when it comes to verbalizing it. So technically, again, you're filling up an entire barrel of water and you're cooking it up. So the Alter Rebbe says, also b'shas bishul hamayim shameser yihi yalachel el mevashel stam. You have to do it stam. The Torah says there's no problem of verbalizing it. Why is there no problem? Because Lamaisa, who cares? The Iker Heter is because I'm in my water that I need, whatever I need, the extra is actually being Mashbiach, or there's no extra Tircha involved. However, the Rekeach is the one who answers, and Lamaisa, his reason is because Lamaisa, your Iker Kavana goes by Letzerich Macher. And since your Iker Kavana Ba'etzim is for the purpose of the next day, so obviously if you're going to verbalize it, I mean, it's a big problem. So that's a shtickle machlekes. The Alter Rebbe continues, "V'afilu einay tzarich b'yamtiv, v'afilu kitin echad shemayim shemavashal b'yamtiv mutar leharim." You're allowed to make a harama. V'loymar tzarich ani lekitin echad shemayim chamin umutar levashal chavis mle'mayim kedei lehishtamesh b'kitin echad shemayim chamin b'yamtiv v'ushi yekayim haramosay v'yishtamesh b'yamtiv b'kitin echad shemayim shemavashal. So, Lamaisa Azoi, what do you need in order to be able to make it happen? It needs to be one Maisa Habishal. You cannot verbalize it, and you actually have to use it, you have to derive direct benefit for whatever you did. So you said you only need one jug of water, you actually have to use up that one jug of water. You cannot just do it and not actually go forward with your harama, so to speak. You actually have to use one jug of water that you warmed up the water with. Hey, Habez, the second Sifhein Alter Rebbe, the second Oifen, Shemixas Hamalacha Shanana Mimana B'Yamtav Him Shmachas Mis'ala Lidei She'edis Hamalacha Shil Tzerich Achel. So this is right. So the Alter Rebbe first brought the first way, which we saw in the Gemara. Now Sifhei, which is the second Oifen, is going like the second one. Heistos, whatever I'm being Na'ana from it on Yom Tiv, it's being mashbiach and it's mis'ala through the she'edis hamalacha shehil tzerich achel. Meaning to say, whatever I be'etzim need for chel, but that whatever I'm using out for the chel is being mashbiach. Whatever I need for Yom Tiv, that is a second oifen how it's permitted, which is a shita of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. L'fichach afal b'she'en kol hamalacha nasis b'vas achas harei zeh mutar. Even though the entire malacha is not done in one shot, it's still permitted. What does that mean? Ketzat. You're allowed to fill up an entire Kedera Basar even though you only need one piece. Even though after you put it on the fire, you remove more flesh to the Kedera. Even if you had a small Kedera and you took it and you poured it into a bigger Kedera, then you're meisif on that, everything is going to be permitted. Even though lemaisa, what did you just do? You were actually meisif in malacha. You added pieces of meat to the kedera afterwards, and those pieces were only there l'tzeinach achel. Listen to Alter Rebbe. V'komokim kivin she'atav yoysu mishtabech v'yam misakin k'sheyesh basar harbe b'kedera lemaisa. Even though my pa'ula was taka l'tzeinach achel, but my Pa'ula at the exact same time was also mashbiach whenever I need l'tzerich yamtiv. Yeah? Yeah, again, the Lashon of Alter Rebbe. Kivin she'atav shel yoysu mishtabech misakin k'sheyesh basar harbe b'kedera nimtza shemashu l'tzerich yamtiv hu mis'ala al yidei mashu hi l'tzerich achel v'arei kol ha'malacha hi l'tzerich yamtiv kumtais, and all of the malacha which you're doing is be'etzem l'tzerich yamtiv. I will also leimer b'feh b'shas bishul shamoser yihi al tzerich achel ela yivashel b'stam. Same nekuda. You're not allowed to actually verbalize it. It has to be done stam. You're doing it, and you're doing it for the purpose of being to be mashbiach with the rest of the kedera. Vav. If you do not need this kedera at all for Yom Tov, sheyesh le'acheres, you have other kederas filled with food. Ve'einu mevashel ela l'tzerich achel. You're doing it for Pashat, for the purpose of the weekday. You're doing it for the purpose of the second day of Yom Tov, or for the purpose of Shabbos. Obviously, otherwise it would be permitted. If Lamaisa, you're not eating it. You don't even need one piece. Siv Dalet and Siv Hey, it was a discussion where you actually need one piece. Once you need one piece, you're allowed to be meisiv on top of that. However, in Sivav, you don't even need one piece. You push it one to save time in the future, not to have to cook the next day. And if that's the case, the harama doesn't help anything, even if you're going to eat something, because the whole reason you're eating is for the tzerich of the harama. But you don't even need any food on the same day. The Alter Rebbe continues, "B'med v'rmamurim k'shein eisek kol hamalacha b'vas achas dahainu shel achas nasa k'deira eitzel eish hoyse b'basa l'tzerich macher v'nimtzu shu meisiv b'malacha l'tzerich macher u'lefichach afal pi shemash eichel mikdeira zu b'yantiv atzme hu mishtabech mis'alei dei teisefes malacha zu ein shvach v'ilize moil klum kiven shu b'atzme einei tzarech shvach v'ilize klal Any tzarech lechol klal min nekteir zu b'yamtiv ein eichel mimena ele kedei lahatir le levashla letzerech macher aveim hu eise kol malacha bevas achas the entire malacha. So again, the Alter Rebbe is saying like this: one, is there a problem to do it in this way, where you add some don't eat anything? Zog the Alter Rebbe, the problem is when you put the kedei on the fire. Once the kedei was already on the fire, you did the peulas habishul. After you did the peulas habishul, then after that you meisiv a piece of meat onto it. You did another secondary pool of bishul. Zog the Alter Rebbe, no, that's also you're not allowed to do that. However, if you do the whole malach in one shot, all the flesh, all the basa was already sitting in the pot. And you put it by the fire in one shot, not you put the potato by the fire. Then you're making other pieces of meat, all in one shot, one peula, one maisa of bishul. V'nimtzer b'shas asiyas hamalacha dahainu amidas hakdeira eitzel ha'esh hinasas kula ka'achas mutar laharim. You're allowed to make such a harama. The Alter Rebbe paskins v'loimer eichel mikdeira zu hayem v'afa b'she'eni tzara klal ha'achila zu afa became mutar le'levashla b'shvil ha'achila zu lefish chilka atera b'mlechas eichel nefesh bein shetzarech lechel bein she'eni tzarech lechel v'eichel v'kiven shemashiyech b'yamtav hum mevash b'vas achas Mshara basar sheyechel b'chel v'eini meisa b'shvil b'chel hareza heter gomer. So the Alter Rebbe Lemaisa says if it's maisa achas, you're allowed to be you can make a harama even in such a case. So you're putting the entire kedera by the fire in one shot. You ba'etzim don't eat anything. You're going to eat from it, but the whole eating is a harama. Zok the Alter Rebbe, it's mutter. Why? The Alter Rebbe gives a beautiful, beautiful agdara, as we just said it. Even though it's a harama, and you don't even need it to eat from it today at all. Afal became mutter. Why? Mutter levashla b'shvil achila zu. Zok the Alter Rebbe lefishal chilka chalka atayra b'mlechas eichel nefesh ben shetzarech lechel ben she'eni tzarech lechel v'eichel. Look at Alter Rebbe. Look what Alter Rebbe is saying. The Torah was not mechalik. Why am I eating? Am I eating because I need to eat or I don't need to eat? Right? The Torah was not mechalik by eichel nefesh ben shetzarech lechel ben she'eni tzarech lechel v'eichel. Kiven shemash yeichel b'yom tov mu mevashel b'vas achas l'maisa. You're eating it, and whatever you're being mevashel for the purpose of Yom Tov is being b'vas achas im shad habasar with the leftover, the other flesh that you're cooking with it. Yeah, sheyechel b'chel im shad habasar sheyechel b'chel ve'enei moisiv b'shvil achel hareza heter gomer. You did not do a secondary hisafa. You did not add anything on to the Maisa Bishul, which is permitted because the Maisa is still technically considered Eichel Nefesh, which the Torah was matter because the Maisa you're still eating. So if it was done B'vas Achas, you were never Maisa anything with Tzerechel. Even in such a harama, it would be permitted. So again, if you're eating a piece of meat from it, it's permitted. You're even allowed to be Maisa onto it. If you're not even, you don't even need to eat. It's mamish a harama. The entire purpose is l'tzerech machar. Now to the paskins that you are allowed to do it only if you're putting the kedera by the fire b'vas achas when all of the meat and everything is already inside. If you're going to come to be meisav on top of that, then it would not be permitted. The Alter Rebbe continues. As long as you do not explicitly state that the rest of the meat is l'tzerech achel, kivin sheheter zeh hu al yidei harama sharei be'emes einu tzarech klal lechel mikdeira zu al einu marim klal. There's no harama ela be'emes u'tzarech l'ktzaz basar shebikdeira zu mutar leim b'fesh hameser tzarech lechel kivin she'ein kan shem chashash iser klal. There's no iser, the fact that you're meisef anything sharei hu tzarech l'me'at basar v'eisa me'at Mevash mevas achas im shar habasar v'gam oisa muot mishtabech mis'ala l'idei shar habasar. There's no problem to verbalize it if you be'emes need a little bit. Why? Because even though technically the leftovers you need it for letzerechel, but the ma'isa that leftovers is being mashbiach. It's actually making it much better. Whatever you need for tzerich yom tov itself, it's being mashbiach that basar itself. So memela, it comes out that there is no problem in such a case. Let's try to finish up the entire siman. The mitzvah Hashem. Zayin achshon ogo ha'ilum levash b'yom tov rishon b'shachris tzerich leil yom tov sheni. V'toyim in ma'at metav shal zeh b'yom tov rishon. Now the Alter Rebbe writes, no ogo ha'ilum to cook on yom tov rishon on the first day of Yom Tov in the morning for the purpose of Yom Tov Sheni, and they taste a little bit from the tafshel on Yom Tov Rishon. Ve'ein nizharin meleimer beferish mevashim tzedich halayla. They're not careful to abstain from verbalizing the fact that they're cooking for the next day. V'tzarich lahazirim al kach. You have to warn them on this. V'gam tzarich lahazirim shlo yesifu basar b'gdeira achar shekvar hamidua eitz al eish. You also have to be mazer them that you can only do it b'vas achas. You cannot be moisif anything once it's already eitz al eish. Kivin she'ena eichel mimena elam ad nimsa shum moisif b'lacha b'shvil yom tov sheni. As we just learned extensively in Sivav. Sivches Alter Rebbe v'gam nochel aziram shlo yinogu kain ala b'yom tov rishon tzarich leil yom tov sheni. It's also befitting to laziram, to warn them, to teach them that they should not do this ala the yom tov rishon for the purpose of Leil Yom Tov Sheni, Shul Letzerich Mitzvah Simchas Yom Tov. Aval im Yevash L'Baharam Azub Yom Tov Sheni Letzerich Achel. If you're doing on the second day of Yom Tov the purpose of a weekday, Lefi Shesh Machmirim Ve'esim Haram L'Gamrei. Yeah, Ve'ein Heta Elim Kain Be'emes Letzerich L'Ma'ad Basar Ve'oz Hitir L'Chachamim Al Drach Malolosh B'Yanav V'Chol Ba'al Nefesh Yachshel L'Divreim Av B'Yom Tov Rishon Letzerich Leil Yom Tov Sheni. Now the Alter Rebbe in Sivches throws a very, very, very important halacha, extremely important halacha. Taisvis, the Magen Avraham as well, is quoted. Very, very important. Lemaisa, there are machmirim by harama kol ikr. So Memela zog Alter Rebbe, it's proper if somebody is doing it, it should only be done from Yom Tov Sheni, Yirishen to Yom Tov Sheni, not from Yom Tov Sheni to Chel. That's another very, very important nukuda. And the Alter Rebbe is even moisef. The Alter Rebbe finishes off. If you be'emes don't need it, and the whole thing is a harama, you're tasting it. Let's say a harama, then you should be machmer. A bal nefesh should be machmer, even from Yom Tov Rishon to Yom Tov Sheni. So the Alter Rebbe paskins from Yom Tov Sheni to Chel, definitely not to do that. From Yom Tov Rishon to Yom Tov Sheni, when you don't need it at all, and the whole thing is harama, then Alter Rebbe paskins about nefesh should not do so. Should yachush l'divreihem to abstain from such a practice. Tess. Alter Rebbe continues. V'aflas v'ad rishena in heter laharim ela kedem achilas shacharis. Even according to the first shita, there's no heter to do harama only before achilas shacharis. Hoilu mevashel b'shasha kol habasar hu roiloi. That the entire flesh is taka, you're able to use it. If it's after the first meal, there's no heter to do harama unless you taka need one piece. Then it's mutal lahisa b'gdera kama chatiches afilu b'zachar v'af b'shaisa kelen tzerich achel m'kamakim kivin shemashal tzerich yomtiv mishtabech mis'ala yidei riba yabasa harei hakel nechshav l'tzerich yomtiv. Okay, beautiful. So if you're doing a harama, so many conditions. You have to be careful that it's also being done before Seder Shachris. If you're not doing it before Seder Shachris, it's an issue with harama. If you be'emes need one piece, then even after Seder Shachris, the time of Seder Shachris, it would be permitted to do so. Yud. Even before you eat, there's no heter to be maidim. Only if you're cooking everything in one pot. You're not allowed to cook one meat in two different pots. Right? You're going to make one type of meat. put up 2 different pots, and you're going to taste a little bit from each pot. Kimin shetam shtei akderis hu shava, im kein koma shetoy mishtein yochel litem achas. Both pots are carrying the same food. So whatever you're able to taste in one, you could have tasted in the other. Right? So you could have put them all together and tasted it from one. The nimsa shakdera sheinis eina misvashalas ela tzerich achel comes out that the entire second kedera is only being cooked, l'tzerich achel, avamutal lavash kamem become minik kedera kaidem achil shacharis. However, if you're making different types of food, then you're allowed to do so before achil shacharis, b'yom terishon, tzerich leil yom tersheni. That's in the Alter Rebbe Kusagrayim. V'toim kazayis m'kol achas v'achas v'afilu yamatim l'tinig dai b'kach. Even if you're just feeding it to a tinig that he should taste it, the svara harishon shebiyanu shehi ikar, it would still be permitted. Even though the Alter Rebbe said talk about nefesh should be machmer, but the ikar la'alocha is that me'ikar adin it's permitted before shul the shachmas. Okay, Seif Yud Aleph v'chol zelachat chila avlo b'diavad shekvar bishal b'yom tov l'tzerich achel. This alachat chila. If you're already cooked on Yom Tov l'tzerich achel, v'afilu achar achila shachris, if it's after achila shachris, v'afilu bishal b'kama k'deres imheim minim atamim shaynim b'chol k'dera harei zatoyim k'sais b'chol k'dera b'yom tov umutal l'achlam b'tzei Yom Tov. You're allowed to eat it on b'tzei Yom Tov miyad. The Ein Tzarech Lahamtin Klum, you don't have to wait anything. B'chlesh Yasav Alpha Shabishal Be'Iser, even though you technically did it Iser. Lekon Suhu Chachamim Kimin Shatam Yikol Kedera Kedera Lemaisa. You retoyim from every single Kedera B'Yamtiv Laihoy Bishul Legamri L'Tzerech Achel. So it comes out that the entire Maisa Bishul was not fully for the purpose of Chel. Lafilu Leitom Umo. Even if you didn't taste anything, Magderis Elosh B'Shasa Bishul. Hoye bedaita litem mikol achas v'achas and bishul kedem achil shachris mutar lechem b'mitzay Shabbos b'mitzay Yom Tov miyad. Even if you cooked it before this man of achil shachris and you had in mind to take a bitoyim, you also don't have to wait b'chdesh yasu mitzay Yom Tov. One is allowed to eat it miyad. Kivin shebishulei hoye beheter shayir reitzel le'achel mikol achas v'achas. Okay. That's a very, very important aside. So we're not geyser b'chdesh yasu if the meiser you were toyim, and even if you're not toyim, so kol's man it was before achilus of the shachris. And your tanka had in mind that you were going to be toyim. In these 2 cases, it's only also until after Yom Tov, but it's mutar miyad immediately after Yom Tov. Yud beis havayim bishul etzerich achel shtei kedeides mimin echad shavim b'taimon. What happens in the case that you cooked 2 pots of even the same min, basar and basar, the same type of basar. Even though you cooked it before the time of achil shachris, al smach heter harama, the hainu sheyechal kazayis mikol achas v'achas, or you filo ochal kazayis mikol achas v'achas, or you take 8 kazayis from every single one of them. Yeah, or sheherim leima shami is damnally eirchem, or you made a harama that maybe I'm going to get guests. Yeah, vitzach l'shtei k'deres, and I'm going to need vitzarech l'shtei k'deres. I'm going to need 2 k'deres ben she'achol ben b'yom tov ben shalei achol harei ma'acholim halolu asolei l'chol anshe beisei. It's forbidden for him and for everybody in his household. Olam kivin shaheda hata la'atzmei laharim harama shasru chachamim lemaisa. You're made a hata to do a harama which the chachamim answered. Yeshlocho shemiyate la'atzmei pam acheres v'gam acherim yulmudu mimenu haterza lokach konsu chachamim al acherim mutarim lechem mehem v'mitzay Yom Tov miyad. So I apologize. Earlier I mentioned b'chdeshiyas over here. Yud Beis, we're discussing Israel, which is forever. So if he was semech l'chatchila to do a harama, which the chachamim asked to do, then for him it's going to be also l'olam. Right? Because Lamaisa, maybe he's going to be matter for himself the next time again. And also, Achedim, Yumudu Mimenu Heter, and others can also learn out from such a heter. Therefore, Chazal gave him such a strong knas, he's never allowed to take benefit from it. However, others could derive benefit from it immediately after Yom Tov. Yud Gimel, the last if. This is all by someone who's maidim, that it's harama, but he thinks he's doing the right thing. He thinks he's doing kehater chachamim. Aval hamavashel b'mezid b'yom tov l'tzeinach achel. Somebody does it on purpose on Yom Tov for the purpose of the weekday. Harei tavshel zemutam b'mitzay Yom Tov miyad. You're allowed to use it immediately after Yom Tov. Afilu lamevashel atzmei yekivin shehu rasha she'also b'mezid, since he's a rasha and he did it on purpose, right? He didn't do a whole shtick harama, maybe a loophole for a rabbinic loophole. No, he's a rasha. That's why the Alter Rebbe is referring to him. He did it pasha b'mezid. Zog the Alter Rebbe. Why? So if he's a rasha, the Chayr should give him a bigger knas. Alter Rebbe says no. We're not chayshish that others are going to learn from him to do it k'ma'aseu b'mezid v'gam hu atzmei, and even he himself yamesim aliba, he's going to realize v'shav and do tshuva. Lakach lekonsu chachamim, therefore Chazal did not give him a knas. V'gam al mashakar ovar ubishal b'yom tov le'irau chachamim lekeinsei al yisur yom tov hakalim ela al yisur shabbos hachamurim, and also for whatever was already done, Chazal did not see that they should give him a knas on the halachas of yom tov which are kal, rather only on the halachas of the yisur shabbos which are marchamor. Hu shekon so k'mashakaz b'sim shin yudches shin chav gimel shin lamites v'chein adin b'eis sham halachas eichel nefesh l'tzerich achel l'tzerich shabbos shel achra v'lehiniach eruv tavshilin l'tzerich yom tov sheni. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we're zeicha to finish the entire Alter Rebbe in the achans of the halachas of achana, and there's a lot more to discuss, a few more simanim to discuss, but Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, this is Tam v'nishlam chelik aleph mitzvah Hashem of this shir. A gut moed, hatzlacha rabbe muflaga.